All right, everybody. Welcome to our November 2014 Hangout. This is Jim Pingle again. The attendee in Fuse may say Chris, but it's really me, just how we log in. And this month we will be covering pfSense 2.2 as a preview. The release candidate is coming very quickly, and we are hoping to have things set up and ready to go here in just a few more short time intervals, I'll say. Holiday coming up is going to delay us a little bit, but we're hoping, the next couple weeks here we'll have a release candidate out shortly thereafter. Release, obviously. So we're going to give you a little taste of what's to come, and I'm going to split this up a little bit between just talking about it and showing you a couple of things. I'm not going to go through a full demonstration of how every last little bit of new feature works. We'll have some more Hangouts coming up for that. I'll explain that a little bit more as we go. All right, first up, some project notes. Just a little bit ago, we had the 10th anniversary of the day that pfSense domains and everything were registered. So we consider that our 10th anniversary of pfSense. So happy birthday, pfSense! Woohoo! 2.2 is rapidly nearing RC stage. We've only got a single-digit number of blocking issues left, and it's getting lower all the time. We've had some pretty big ones that were fixed even just in the last 24 hours. So the new snapshots coming out are just really, really good. Still have a few nits that might keep people from using in production. We don't quite recommend that yet. But once we get around to tagging that as an RC, then people can start using it in limited production. But we still recommend at least testing, lab setups, that kind of stuff. We have a FreeBSD journal article coming up, sort of along the same lines of what this presentation is, going over our new stuff for 2.2 and a little bit of background on the project and some more background on some of the new features than we'll go into here. And also Verizon Cloud Marketplace launched, and one of the starting platforms they have supported on that is pfSense, which we were kind of excited about. They're sort of trying to, I guess it's sort of an equivalent thing like to Amazon, AWS, that kind of stuff. And as an ongoing project, I'm not sure how many people follow closely what's going on in the wiki, but we are making a conscious effort to revamp the pages and content in the wiki. Some pretty old and outdated information in there, and we're trying to clean that up and get stuff relevant for current versions. There's a lot of info there that is just not really stuff that had any bearing on the current version. It's just old, outdated stuff that people rarely and really should not be using anymore. So we're trying to clean that up. So be on the lookout there. You might visit the wiki, look at the recent changes, and look at some of the cool new stuff we've got going on there. So in this presentation, we're just going to go over a few areas of 2.2 that have changed, the big areas, and I've got a few miscellaneous bits at the end. But first off, there's just been many, many updates, thousands of commits, hundreds of bugs fixed, and all sorts of other good stuff in there. The base OS upgrade, and that's a little bit different than just talking about FreeBSD 10. We've tried to change how we're tracking FreeBSD versus how we used to before, and it's just a little bit different philosophy we're trying to take on there. The base OS did change to FreeBSD 10. Go over some under the hood changes, how things like IPsec and OpenVPN changed, DNS Resolver, because we got Unbound now. How CARP has changed, changes in Outbound NA, the package system. We got some translations going on, and some new features for geom mirrors and some places in the firewall options and rules and things that have changed. And like I said, a few miscellaneous things. And there are a lot more than that have gone on than what we're going to touch on today. First off, for the base OS tracking, we lagged behind for many years. We were on FreeBSD 8 for a lot longer than we should have, because when we tried to go to 9, it just did not work out. And so by the time we got around to this, we were tracking 10 stable rather than tracking like 10.0 release and just sticking with that. So what we were trying to do is, move with them so that by the time we landed on what our release was, it would be the newest stable release of FreeBSD it could be, whether that ended up being a 10 stable or a 10.1, and it lucked out that 10.1 of FreeBSD was just released, so we're timing this pretty well, and now we're tracking the 10.1 release engineering branch. So now that we're caught up, we're trying to find ways to stay caught up. Two of those biggest ones are getting our patches back into FreeBSD wherever we can. That way we don't have to maintain our own set of patches. They'll become a part of FreeBSD and they'll move with the system. That way, because what a lot of our problems are now is, okay, FreeBSD changed something, it broke one of our patches, we got to go and figure out how and rectify that. And in other places in our ports, we have our PF ports in the tools repository that, there are custom changes to ports and things for how we use it. We're trying to get a lot of those changes back into the FreeBSD ports tree, whether they are, added as option knobs or various other things that are beneficial for everybody, or entire ports that might get contributed back up there. As a way to reduce the number of differences between what we have and what they have, because the closer we are, the less we have to work to put out a new release. We just, fix a few patches, get it up and going. Now we did land on FreeBSD 10.1, so we do have all the improvements from between FreeBSD 9 and every 9 release of FreeBSD 10.0 and now 10.1. The biggest things that are relevant to us are PF improvements in FreeBSD 10. PF is no longer giant locked; it's got fine grain locking, so it's SMP friendly, which means it can spread the load for PF across multiple cores, and it can put multiple cores and CPUs to use a lot easier, and actually when it couldn't before at all. So that will bring a pretty good speed improvement to people running on multi-core systems or people with lower speed cores, but many of them, versus faster single cores. We've also got some speed improvements into PF. There was the Jenkins hash that was used was found by George Noble Neal to be consuming a pretty hefty amount of time in processing in PF, and so we changed out that hash function for XX hash, and it got a 3% improvement overall in the worst case scenario, and that will probably translate to a lot better results in the real world. But that's a pretty big win for changing out the hash like that. Also in FreeBSD 10, there was improved virtualization support for acting as a guest. So you might see this in various hypervisors you've got where you have pfSense VMs that might speed up or change for the better. Specifically, Vertio drivers apparently were bumped quite a bit, and they work quite a lot better for Linux-based hypervisors. Things like KVM and VirtualBox and QEMU and things like that. Anything that uses Vertio drivers. Also, Zen PVHVM is in the kernel. Now, you need to watch out if you're updating Zen because we have had instances where in testing and in live when people have tried to do it, their hard disk IDs and NIC devices changed. Like their NICs may have been Realtek or something before, and after it rebooted, they came up as the XN adapters because there was some preference expressed in the hypervisor to use those when they're available, and it just automatically changed, much to the surprise of people who got stuck at a console having to reassign their NICs. So definitely be on the lookout for that if you're in the Zen world. You might want to track our bugs anyway, because there are still some issues there where like the XN adapters don't like VLAN tagging, so you may have to drop down to E1000s. Hyper-V is working pretty well out of the box except for CARP. Apparently it didn't really work all that great before, but now it's much improved. There's a couple of threads on the forum about that if you're interested. And we haven't done a whole lot with Beehive yet, but that was some pretty big improvements in FreeBSD 10 for virtualization, hosting other virtual machines and things, and acting itself as a guest. We haven't tested a whole lot, but it's a promising new thing to look out for in the future. There were improvements in CARP. The CARP subsystem was changed, which I'll go over that in a little bit more detail when I get to the CARP stuff later. Updated drivers for pretty much all NICs, but specifically for 10 gig NICs, a lot of people have been happier with the drivers that are in the 2.2 versus what we tried to pull into The older versions, in 2.1, we tried to backport as much drivers as we could, but there's just fundamental other changes that things rely on that it works better as a whole on FreeBSD 10. Wireless saw some big improvements, especially 802.11n and a lot more drivers. We're still working on some issues there, trying to make use of it. I think we've had a few people who've actually managed to get it to work. But we're finding that there are some drivers that still have some quirks, and I'm not sure how much or if anything we can do about that. But there are cards out there that do work, and we'll do 802.11n, and you'll get pretty good associations and things running on pfSense. So the situation's better. I might still use an external app if it's me, but it's nice to see we've got some better support there. And there are pages out there for FreeBSD that go over all of the major improvements between the various releases. So you might skim those and look. We were on 8.3 before. We're moving up to 10. So you could look at anything that comes along from the 9 releases or mostly the 10.0 and 10.1s. Some other under the hood changes we've got here to pfSense. The PHP version that we use, we moved up to 5.5. I think we're on 5.3 and 5.4 at various times on 2.1. And we also changed the backend from fast CGI to PHP FPM in terms of how our the GUI light HTTP calls PHP functions, and it's supposed to be more scalable and I think a little bit less memory usage and more efficient. So we're looking for some good improvements from that. Lots of other daemons have updated, things like UPnP and whatnot. Too many to list. Packages are just a lot different. When you boot one up, you might notice the different versions there. The Captive Portal database was a flat file before. Now we moved it to an SQLite database. Should be able to handle a lot more clients more efficiently without so much slowdown. The default serial speed used to be, for years it was 9600. We have moved that up to 115200. We've brought it out of the Stone Age. It has been changed by default all around as much as we can. So if you have a serial device, now you could have configured that as a preference in your configuration file, and it would have worked, from the loader on or from after the loader on, at the speed you set or in various places. But this will make it the default for everything, no matter, even if you didn't set it as a preference. And, on a new, fresh installation, that'll be the default too. We're also trying to reduce the number of kernels that we've got out there. On AMD64, you might notice there's no special embedded kernel. It's the same kernel for a full install as it is for NanoBSD or, in serial and everything else. It's just, we just have an AMD64 kernel. There's no, no one for VGA or serial or anything. We're trying to reduce the number of differences, overall, sort of like, how we are in tracking FreeBSD, because the less differences there are, the easier it is to roll a release and lowers the amount of things we have to test. Now, i386 still has a special embedded kernel because ALEX and some other hardware out there may not work ideally with the other, VGA enabled type kernels loaded. So we've still got that there, but i386 is, I know people hate to see it, hear it, especially me, but it is on its way out. It's getting very difficult to source hardware that's not 64-bit capable, and eventually these things are going to go EOL. Okay, so one of the big areas that changed is IPsec. And one of the biggest things in the back end that's changed is there are a lot more secure alternatives now, and also faster alternatives for how to configure IPsec. FreeBSD Foundation and Netgate, they work together to sponsor work from John Mark Gurney to add ASCTR and ASGCM, which is a Galios counter mode, which is a lot more efficient algorithm. Does the authentication encryption, it basically in one step, has lower latency, lower overhead, higher throughput, and then we also got acceleration for that in there with ASNI modules. So if you hardware with ASNI, like the C2758 unit we sell, or the 7551, is going to see a vast improvement in speed. The FreeBSD IPsec stack was also updated for a few other things by Ermel. So between all that work, If you have pfSense on both ends or something that happens to support these modes on both ends, and you have ASNI, it's going to fly. We've seen speeds over 700 meg per second on pretty good, pretty moderate hardware in the wild. So, and that was, before a lot of these other improvements went in. So it's just probably going to be a lot faster now. Now, you do need to watch out for, making sure both sides support that. Other algorithms and things may not see quite the same level of acceleration. So, when possible, obviously use pfSense all over the place, and you'll be great. We also switched away from Raccoon to Strong Swan for keying. That's a pretty big change. We've had to work a lot to make sure things were working equivalently, and we're still working on that. There's still a couple of things we haven't in the status in other places where there's still some work to do. Raccoon, it was okay for what it did, but it had some quirks and things that we were just we hit some walls with it, and switching to Strong Swan opened up a lot more opportunities. Strong Swan can give us both IKE v1 and v2 both together in the same daemon, and we do have IKE v2 options in there now, and also L2TP and IPsec together works a lot easier. You don't have to have external patches or hack up anything in Raccoon like you do in Strong Swan. Just works. And that we have had some reports of people getting it to work. I've had it working myself for a couple of clients, but I haven't done wide testing with it. And both IKE v2 and LTTP plus IPsec are ones that can work with the built-in Microsoft clients in Windows. So the old arguments of that people were stuck on PPTP because it was built into Windows, well, that all goes out the window. It doesn't matter now. Strong Swan is also multi-threaded. And it can handle, at least we've heard, up to 20,000 tunnels on suitable hardware, and that's just a theoretical limit. It could be even higher. It just depends on how many, what the hardware is like and everything else. We've only heard of people running in the hundreds before. Maybe I'm not sure what the highest we've seen is, but I know personally I've seen ones that have had close to 400 or just over 400 tunnels. And that was with Raccoon, so it should be even better on Strong Swan. And also, Strong Swan gives us ECDH groups and ECDSA certs and signatures for V1 and V2 that interoperate with SuiteB from Windows. So, Vista 7, 8, and later, pretty much anything they support. And that will also help with getting a good, strong encrypted connection from a Windows workstation in. Personally, I still prefer OpenVPN, but this will give us a lot more flexibility, especially for those who are saddled with the requirements from their either customers or management where they can't install additional clients and things of that nature. Strong Swan also has a lot more flexible logging and debugging options, which I can pop over here into one of my virtual machines and show you. We moved the advanced IPsec settings out of System Advanced Miscellaneous over here to an Advanced Settings tab in IPsec. And you can see there are a lot more different areas of Strong Swan that you can change the logging options for. You can turn on debugging or various levels of logging for just certain parts of Strong Swan, so you don't have to turn on a fire hose of debugging information and hope you find what you're looking for. You can just do it bit by bit, which is really nice. And these don't changing these logging levels does not restart the daemon either, so it doesn't disconnect your tunnels, so you can change it pretty well live, and it's a good debugging tool that's actually a lot more useful than what we were able to do in Strong Swan before, or in Raccoon before rather. But as you can see here on this page, we've had a few these other options like the MSS clamping and force IPsec reload and prefer old IPsec essays. Those used to be under System Advanced Miscellaneous. We've moved those in under here. And if we go back over here, like onto tunnels, if we look in the options here, like now there's a key exchange version. You can choose IKE v1 or v2. There's a few other, like in your options for encryption. You can see we've got our AES GCM modes, little things like that, and some additional DH groups, and a few other new knobs and things that you can change in there for IPsec now that didn't exist before. And that's all. And what we intend to do at some point after the 2.2 release is to come back to this and have a more general, or more specific rather, IPsec in 2.2 hangout that might show you how to configure, say, IKEV2 or L2TP and IPsec together for like a Windows client or a Mac client or iOS, Android, stuff like that. And we'll be coming back to topics like that after 2.2 ships. Another area to see some big improvement is OpenVPN. Mostly the GUI was fleshed out in various places to add some more options and things. One of the big things we had a request for was people connecting to VPN providers that had a username and password but no certificate requirement. And we can accommodate that now in the GUI. If we go over to OpenVPN, if we look on our client settings here, if we're on a SSL TLS type connection, you have here in the GUI a place to enter in a username and password. And when you do that, down here in the client certificate, you can leave that on none for the username and password if you have it in there. So that would let you connect to a VPN provider that did not provide you with certificates if you only had to have a username and password. That works a lot smoother now. Another area that saw some improvement is over here in client-specific overrides. If you are running an SSL TLS type connection for like a multi-site type VPN, there's a lot more options in here you can use, not just for specifying a tunnel network for a client, but you can also add in like additional routes to push just to this client for IPv4, IPv6. This IPv4 remote networks, this is the big one because this lets you put, in the GUI, your iRoute statements that you used to have to put down in the advanced options. So if you had iRoute statements all filled in down here in the advanced options before, now you could just put those in as remote networks in a comma-separated list. And then a few other options, redirect the gateway, specific DNS servers, NTP servers, that kind of stuff. Or you can also tell it to have the client ignore anything it gets from the server too. There's a lot more here than there used to be. Over here, like in your server options, also in the client options, the old compression setting used to just be on or off, but now you can explicitly disable it so you get no compression, and you have the choice of enabling with adaptive compression or without adaptive compression. But the old default was to have it enabled with adaptive compression enabled, and what that would do is it would periodically test the data, and if it was compressing, it would leave compression on. If it wasn't compressing, it would turn compression off, which is a pretty good method, but that can burn some extra CPU. So if you're looking for more performance, you can turn that off where it tests the data. So we also have this authentication digest algorithm, which was used to just see it on IPsec. Now, you could always set it for OpenVPN in the advanced options, but we didn't have an equivalent for it in the GUI. OpenVPN, if you don't specify anything, defaults to SHA-1. So our GUI defaults to SHA-1 also. But you need to make sure that if you are doing this from scratch and you see the SHA-1, that you just leave it at SHA-1. Don't be tempted to set it to none just because you didn't set it before. Just leave it on SHA-1 unless you know both ends are set to something different. And there's also a few other options in various places, like you can actually disable IPv6 for an instance. There's options on the clients to not pull or execute routes from the upstream. You can change how verbose the logging is. and default is 4, which is normal. You can make it quieter or more verbose if you're looking to debug things. Also, the hardware crypto, you might notice that some changes here. OpenSSL's built-in AES-NI code is pretty good for OpenVPN, but if you had loaded the AES-NI module in FreeBSD, OpenVPN tried to latch onto that, or OpenVPN and OpenSSL tried to latch onto that rather than using OpenSSL's native code. And now that AES-NI is useful for IPsec, people might want the best of both worlds. So we've changed OpenVPN to actually ignore the AES-NI module while it's loaded, because the OpenSSL code is more efficient for OpenVPN with AES-NI than it is using the crypto support. So you might notice that if you have AES-NI active and you try to activate it here and you notice it's not in the list or it doesn't work, then that's why, because OpenSSL is already doing a better job than it can the other way. Okay, now that we're through OpenVPN, we got our DNS Resolver, which is Unbound. We had Unbound available as a package for a long time, but now we've integrated it into our base system, so it doesn't need to be a package anymore. And FreeBSD 10 did the same thing. They removed bind and put in Unbound because it was a good, more like a caching resolver, more like a client would use. It didn't, and it has a lot of other uses as well, but it was a better fit for the base than bind was. We haven't ripped out DNS mask. It's still there. If you upgrade from an older version, you will still be using the DNS forwarder DNS mask. However, if you start a fresh install, you will get Unbound as your DNS resolver. And it has DNSSEC enabled by default. So like if you go up here to services and DNS resolver, that's Unbound. Forwarder is DNS mask. You'll notice it's enabled, has DNSSEC on, and forwarding mode is off, which means that Unbound is going to try to talk straight to the root servers. It will not actually use your system general servers right away. The firewall itself will try to query Unbound first, and then Unbound will try to make its queries out. But if Unbound fails, whatever reason, the firewall itself can fall through to your other name servers from system general if you want. But it's more secure to have Unbound talk directly to the root, so it can verify DNSSEC a lot easier. But you don't have to trust your forwarders. Now, DNS query forwarding is still pretty useful, especially for multi-WAN, because otherwise, if Unbound's talking to the roots, it means it's following the default gateway, which you may not want for a multi-WAN type scenario. You want it to be predictable, so you can send DNS server A out WAN 1, DNS server B out WAN 2, and so forth. It still does, host overrides, domain overrides, registering of DHCP leases, and so on. So there's still much the same functionality that DNS mask had, and more. It's improved scalability, improved performance of large cache sizes. There's also a lot more other ways you can tweak it under advanced settings. Some more info you can get out of it, or better opportunities to tweak it, especially in larger deployments. Now, in FreeBSD 10, the CARP subsystem has changed quite a bit. The CARP VIPs used to have their own interface, which over the years the names of those have changed. It used to be like CARPO, and then it was VIP1, and then it was EM0 VIP1 or WAN VIP1. But it always had its own separate interface, and that concept has gone away. CARP VIPs now just show as their own IP address on your physical interface with some additional properties. Just like over here, I've got if config output up here. You can see 192.168.1.1 is the IP address on the NIC. 192.168.2.1 is a CARP VIP, which you can tell because it has VHID1 at the end. And down here at the bottom, you still see the CARP status for the interface. And if we go over here to status CARP, you'll see that too. It just says LAN at VHID1, virtual IP, and the status is master. Another significant advantage is as you can see here, you do not have to have the 3 IP addresses like you had to have before. You can have just one CARP VIP in a new subnet, and both units don't have to have that IP directly. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because you can work around a provider limitation. Say they only give you a /30, you could still do CARP there. The bad thing is, each node would have to use that IP to talk to that subnet, and only the master node is going to be able to get out or be reached. You can't reach the secondary node if it's not master on the VIP. So in a case where, say that's your WAN, if that was your only WAN, the secondary would have no way to get out and fetch updates or install packages. You'd have to disable CARP on the primary, fail over to the secondary, let the secondary do its updates, and then fail back to the primary, which is not ideal. So the 3 IPs are still best, but you can work around that scenario if you want to use just one. Also, as you can see here at the top, there is a persistent CARP maintenance mode. What that does is, instead of just disabling CARP, it puts it into a mode where it will stay off even after a reboot. So say you are upgrading your master, you could put it into maintenance mode, and then it could reboot after installing an update. It could, it would stay off while it reinstalled it. Say you've got, 1,000 packages that you need, like Squid or routing daemons, things like that. It wouldn't try to take over until you come back in here and you disable maintenance mode. So that can help make the upgrade process a lot smoother in that scenario. And not a lot of people are impacted by that. There's a significant chunk, but not, I don't know if it's the majority. I doubt it's the majority, but it'll help a lot of people who want to make sure their CARP upgrades go a little bit smoother. All right, another area that's seen some big changes is Outbound NAT. If we go over here to our Outbound NAT, you can see the screen has changed quite a bit. The manual Outbound NAT, there's 4 modes now. There's automatic, manual, which are the 2 from before, but there's also a hybrid mode and a disable mode. Manual Outbound NAT works like it always has, where it just uses your rules. That's it. Automatic Outbound NAT functionally works like it did before, except down here in the bottom, you'll see this automatic rules section, and it shows you what networks are actually having NAT applied and how that NAT is being applied. So you can get a better idea of what NAT is happening before you make that switch from automatic to manual if you want. But a lot less people are going to have to switch to manual because of our new hybrid mode. What hybrid mode does is it respects your automatic rules and also respects the rules here in your manual rule list. So like in this case here, I made a static port rule for traffic from a PBX IP going out, but I didn't have, it's all still using your automatic rules down here in the bottom. You don't have to completely switch to manual and have, dozens of rules here just to add one rule for static port for a PBX. Or you could, send some traffic out an alternate VIP, or you could disable NAT for a public IP segment, or you could, set up any number of different NAT scenarios now without completely switching over to manual Outbound NAT. You could even set up NAT for like a CARP type scenario, although that scenario would probably still be better switched to manual with, and then adjusting the resulting rules. The disable NAT mode, it just does what it says, turns off NAT. We had a significant number of people who would try to disable NAT by going and disabling PF, because it says it would, in the description of the option to disable PF, it says it would also disable NAT, but it also disables the firewall, which is not what people want. So, by disabling the Outbound NAT, it just turns off NAT. So if you're in a fully routed scenario, either public or private addresses, then you can just disable NAT by going here, clicking disable, clicking save. You don't have to switch to manual and delete all the rules. You don't have to jump through any hoops. Just disable, save, done. Another area here is the package system. We're still using PBIs for 2.2, though that's not going to last. We're probably going to switch it over just to plain package for 2.3 or whatever's beyond there. Um, but for 2.2, we're still using PBIs. We are signing them now cryptographically, just like we do our update images. Um, Packages that fail that test will not be installed, though you can override that with a checkbox. It's not something we'd recommend people do in general unless you're a developer working on creating your own packages or editing packages. And also, warnings are displayed for a non-default package server. Say you had a custom package server that was set, it might have been set accidentally. The popular case is something like Leska that people don't realize what it does. We've got a nice warning here. You can, I set my package server to a bogus URL just so you could see the warning. It basically yells at you saying that you're pulling packages from a server that's not an official server. And it's use at your own risk type thing. If you're a developer, you can pretty much ignore that. But if you are a user, you might want to pay heed to that because you probably don't want to be using packages from a package server that's not a legitimate package server. Or if you tried something like Leska or a similar package that may have pointed you to some other repository, who knows what you're pulling down for packages. There's no chain of trust there. The packages on our servers have been built by us, signed by us. There's some weight behind that. So, and it's not a fatal error. It's just a warning that likes to yell at you about using those servers. Also, if we look at our package list here, on available packages, we have split them into some subtabs. By default, it shows you everything, but you can filter that just down to say network or network management, things. And we're working on the classifications for these as well. So, and security, services, system, and other. But by default, it still shows you everything. But if you know a particular package is in a particular category, it might help you find it a lot easier or quicker. Also, on your installed packages list here, these little PKG and XML buttons used to be pretty much identical. So we fixed the XML button to do sort of what it implies. It will pull down the XML and reinstall just the XML and maybe the dependent files listed there, like INC files and such. Used to be able to fall into a situation where something like Squid could be, have its binaries installed, but you couldn't uninstall it because something removed the squid.inc file, or say you remove Squid but forgot to remove LightSquid first. You can get into some pretty weird areas, but the XML button should help you get past most of those now. We have some more translations available now. If you go back out under System in General, we have our language choice here. We used to just have English, and 2.1 I think we had a Portuguese. Turkish is in there now. There is a Japanese translation. I think there's still some pull requests pending to fully activate it, but it's coming pretty. We're hoping to have that in 2.2 release. And we have a new translation server. It's coming. It's not online just yet, but when it is live, it'll be at translate.pfSense.org, and you can help take the messages from pfSense and translate them into whatever language you like. And or if you see messages that are that have already been translated, but maybe there's some missing strings. Or maybe there's things that have changed you need to retranslate. We'll always take submissions of that sort of thing. Another big thing is geom mirrors and software RAID. The installer has had support for setting up a gmirror for quite some time. And you can see it's for software RAID basically. As you can see here, this VM has 2 drives in it, and the mirror is complete, which is good. But now we have a diagnostics geom mirrors page that lets you manage that mirror. Before, if you had a drive die, you had to go and dig up the manual commands to run at the command line to forget the drive and reactivate the drive, or add a new drive and whatnot. But now what you can do is manage that all in the GUI. If a drive dies, you can forget the drive from the array and have it rebuild. Or like say this, I want to remove that drive, and now it still shows complete because it was actually removed from the array. It wasn't, just yanked. Um, and, say I replace that drive, I can just pop that back in the mirror. And it shows degraded and it's synchronizing the drive. So if we go back here and see it's synchronizing, and it'll keep going until it hits 100%. And you could also, deactivate a drive before you upgrade. That way, if say your upgrade blows up, you could actually switch to the other drive, the secondary drive, boot from that, and you'd still be good. And then you could, rebuild the drive with the bad upgrade, and put it back in the array. And then it's a little bit fairly robust. Not quite as robust as a VM snapshot, but it's pretty good. And the status of these mirrors is monitored as well. It will issue you an email alert when a mirror enters a degraded state, or when it enters a synchronizing type state, or any change is going to issue you an email, which is a pretty good thing to have when it comes to monitoring your RAID arrays. The firewall logs, this is more of a back-end change. The raw log format has been rewritten into just basically a comma-separated value format, CSV format. And we have a whole grammar up on the wiki that tells you the exact format that can be used to write a parser if you need to for something else like Splunk or some other package. The format of that might change a little bit before release. If it does, the documentation will update to follow it. But before the logs, you had to guess a lot, and there were multiple lines, and some logs messages had tons of extra data that was just irrelevant. All that's been collapsed, and we've written our own log daemon, and it's a lot more flexible now and a lot easier to work with. Also, the firewall rules, especially your custom rules, that each have a unique tracker ID, so that when you go to look them up, your tracker IDs are always going to be the same. There are still some dynamic tracker IDs from built-in rules. So if you see some rules that can't find, some log messages that can't find what the rules were, the rule is probably deleted, or it may have been a built-in rule that's since expired. But for the most part, your custom rules, you're always going to be able to find them by the tracker ID, which is going to make tracking down messages in your logs a lot easier, because before, the rule IDs could change and shift every time the filter reloaded, and that won't happen now. Also, in your firewall rules, in certain areas where it makes sense to have, there is this firewall self choice, which translates internally in PF to any IP address on this firewall. So say you're trying to prevent somebody on an interface from reaching the GUI on any IP address on the system, you could just block them from reaching this firewall, which is a pretty good way to simplify a lot of protections for the firewall itself. Another area that comes into is, say you've got a DMZ on a public subnet, and on the WAN, you just want to pass everything into that subnet. You could actually end up passing stuff to the GUI as well on its IP in that segment, which is a bad thing. So you could block to the firewall and pass to the rest of the segment, which is a little bit easier than trying to track the IPs manually. And also the interface macros like LANnet, like here, those now also include any subnet that was reachable by static routes on that interface. Whereas before, it was strictly the network on that interface. It sort of brings a similar behavior together between this macro and on automatic outbound NAT, which already accounted for the additional static route subnets, but the firewall rules didn't. Now it does. So you might find on upgrade, if you relied on the old behavior, you might need to adjust your rules a bit to make sure that you only account for just the LAN network itself and not the static route subnets there. Something else I'm not sure how many of you might have hit, Firefox 31 and beyond, they've got a really nasty bug in certificate validation that will slow your computer pretty much to a halt if it has trouble validating certificates. It will give you some grief, especially if you visit multiple pfSense firewalls, because the old GUI certificates were generated in such a way where they were really not quite right. They were all pretty much identical. There wasn't anything unique about them. And so when Firefox's new PKIX validation tried to verify a chain of trust between them, it would get stuck on a very complex algorithm and just sort of fall into a trap where it could never, make sense of that group of certificates, and it would burn up all the CPU on a core for a significant chunk of time just trying to validate that. Now, Firefox 31 and 32 had a toggle where you could turn that off and it was still okay, but in 33 they removed that toggle and now you're stuck. If you've hit that bug, it does have a Bugzilla URL, a Bugzilla ID, or sorry, Bug ID and Bugzilla. You can visit that and vote it up, and hopefully they will fix it sooner rather than later. If it does affect you, once you're on 2.2, a new certificate in 2.2 will have a better set of defaults. As you can see here, it automatically fills in like an email address using the values in the firewall when it was created. And also, it tries to fill in a better name, and it puts a unique ID in the CN to help differentiate between itself and other instances of other certificates. So those are a bit better now. And if you upgrade to 2.2 and you want to generate yourself a new GUI certificate, you can do that from the console. I'm trying to figure out a way to do it from the GUI. Every time I've tried to do it in the GUI so far, it has tripped up the browser when the certificate changed, and it caused some problems. Doing it from the console or SSH is pretty safe. You just run that command from a shell prompt, and it will set up a new certificate, restart the GUI, and then the next time you visit the GUI, you'll have to re-accept the certificate, and off you go. All right, just a few other miscellaneous tidbits here toward the end. If you look in the system logs, I know before, you could adjust how many lines were shown to you in the GUI, but you couldn't control how big the actual logs were. Now you can control the size of the actual binary circular log files. Before, they were fixed at about 500 kilobytes per log file, which roughly translated to somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 log lines, depending on the area and what was in the log lines. And they work like a circular buffer. It got to the end, it would rewrite from the beginning. If you got a lot more disk space, you can increase the size of these log files a bit, like say 1.5 meg, 2 meg each, to triple or quadruple the amount of log lines you get. It's not as good as forwarding them off to a syslog server proper, but it will give you a little bit more flexibility in how much you retain locally. And it does show you how much disk space is currently in use by the log files and how much is left on the disk where the logs are stored. Another area where it has a similar adjustment that you can do is under backup restore and your config history here, where you can see how many configurations are kept over time, and you can do the config difference between them. Before, it was a hard-coded default of keeping 30 configurations on a full install and 5 on NanoBSD. Those defaults are still there, but you can keep more or less if you choose. Say you want to keep 100, you can keep 100. And just like on the other area, it shows the current space in use by your backups. That way you can, use your best judgment to know if you've got enough room left to keep those. It's more of an issue on NanoBSD where the conf slice is kind of limited in size. I don't think I've got it active on any of these, but there is a widescreen theme. Let me pop that on this guy here. Actually, let me do it on this one. There's a pfSense NG-FS, which is short for full screen. And as you can see, it stretches. You can actually add additional columns for more widgets if you want. And there you go. Now, personally, I still like I like how this flows, but I'm still partial to the fixed theme myself, but this this is nicer for people who want to have more width in terms of real estate in the horizontal direction. Another thing you might have noticed back here, if you've used Tutu at all, generally the bars look a lot nicer, nice rounded edges, and also the disk usage shows you the usage on every slice. So on NanoBSD, that shows you your root slice, your configuration slice, and temp and var, which are your RAM disks. Or if you're on a full install and you've activated that option, they'll show here too. So it gives you a better idea of what you're actually using. Because some people have exhausted their space in temp and var and not realized it. There wasn't a good way to tell that. And we've revamped a little bit. Just basically look and feel of a lot of these widgets has been improved a bit. So hopefully it's a lot easier for people to look at now. But there might still be some quirks, but it's better now than it has been before. If you have Captive Portal active, which I don't think I have on any of these units, let me double check here. No. Down here in your portal pages, if you'd uploaded custom portal pages, error pages, or logout pages, once you upload a page, before there was no way to get that back or to remove it, to reset it, and now there is. There are buttons that will show up to reset those. Actually, which should make it easier to manage that stuff, especially for people looking to make an edit to their portal page if they didn't save a local copy of it, or if, say, your computer died and you didn't have a local copy, you can fetch a copy of that. We have some additional dynamic DNS providers. I know dns.org went paid, which upset a lot of people. So we've got some more options in here. And there's a full list on the wiki page. NTP options have been improved quite a bit in terms of the GPS support mostly. There are people who have activated serial GPSs on here, and I've got I actually do have a serial GPS on this guy, but I don't remember. I haven't tried it on Tutu. It was just it was some contributed code. It was a lot more flexible in terms of what you can get out of it. So if we look at our NTP status, you might see. No, it's not on there. It shows some from GPS, but it hasn't quite latched onto it yet. In the packet capture screen, another new thing we got here is in your host address, you can do some Boolean logic. You can do and or. You can also do not with an exclamation point. So if you were looking for to capture between two specific hosts, you can do, host A, comma host, host A, comma host B. Or if you want to do two different hosts, you could do host A, pipe, host B, which would get traffic for either of the hosts. And you can negate with the exclamation point. The port can also do negation, so you could do not port 80 or not port 22. Up here in the protocols, we've actually also added some negation here to exclude specific protocols. So you want to capture everything but ICMP. You can do that. And there are dozens, if not hundreds of things that I didn't mention that are new. You can see them all at the wiki page linked here, or you just put in Tutu new features and changes in the doc wiki search on doc.pfSense.org. You can find it that way. As we finalize Tutu, that document will be updated. We update it usually every month or two, probably a little more often as the release nears, because there's less to update. And that's the gist of it. There's like I said, there's a lot more that I didn't cover that's new, but that's the biggest parts. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat. Hit the little bubble icon at the top and type away, and just let me know if you have any questions, and we can try to answer a few things. I'm sure the number one question in everybody's mind is, when is 2.2 going to be released? And as soon as the bugs are fixed is my favorite answer, or as soon when it's ready. Uh, but realistically, not much longer now. We're pretty close, and there's some bugs that we're going back and forth about, things to fix and what needs to wait. So, anybody have any questions? Haven't seen any come through yet. Yeah, the 64-bit kernel. Every kernel has always had serial, but VGA is in all the 64-bit kernels now. The serial versus VGA console choice varies based on how you install it. If you install it from the serial memstick, the serial console will be preferred by default in the config the default config that it puts in. However, that can always be overridden by the preferences in the configuration you have restored or that you activate. If you look under System Advanced, you have options here to activate the serial console and also which console to prefer. If you only have a serial console, you need to make sure that primary console is on serial and that you have serial enabled, just to make sure you got to have a smooth experience there. We're trying to there's still an open bug, and we're trying to figure out the best way to fix it, but there's still a way that you could land yourself into a situation where if you restore a configuration that doesn't have serial active to a device that only has serial, you can land yourself in a bad situation. But it's something we're working on. But yes, to answer your question, that 64-bit kernel has both consoles. If CARP is changing to remove the 3 IPs, primary, secondary, and VIP, would we need to upgrade both devices at the same time, i.e. would a 2.1 CARP work with 2.2 CARP? That's not something that's just going to be removed out from under you. Your existing configuration will upgrade, and it'll come through just like it was. We've never have recommended running 2 different versions in production against each other like that. If you were to upgrade the secondary and temporarily run that as 2.2 and then upgrade your primary later, that's what we usually recommend. But that's not something that's just going to up and change on you. You don't immediately have to delete that. You can run with the 3 IP configuration on 2.2 and it works better than using 1 IP actually. But you have the option of running with just 1. Now, if you were trying to actually run 2.1 and 2.2 together in production as a CARP cluster for any length of time, I suspect that's going to have some problems. But that's not something we've tested yet. pfSync may or may not work between the two, probably not. Config sync definitely would not work. But in terms of upgrading, as long as you upgrade them both, you'll be fine. It's not something, that type of configuration isn't something that's going to change on you. Here's another one. Is there going to be support for virtual interfaces, i.e. to allow pfSense to provide a gateway for multiple isolated subnets over the same physical interface? That's not something we have in 2.2 or something we're looking to do. You really, that's what VLANs are for. To isolate them, you have to isolate them at layer 2. So you'd have to use VLANs to do that. Any more questions? When is the 2.2 book coming out? That is not, we don't really have a good schedule for that, but as we work on it, it will always be available for gold subscribers. You can just download it. And I saw somebody else sent a message, but it showed up on my tablet, but it did not show up to me. Hold on, I'm trying to see if I can find it some other way. Adam Thompson, I see where you sent that to my secondary connection, not to me. I guess maybe it's actually, maybe your other message was going to Chris's other connection and not to me. But if you send something over to Jim P Test 2, I will see it. That'll show up on my tablet connection. Or if you send it to the Chris Buechler 2 is apparently what it connected me to as the moderator. But if you look in the list and send it to the moderator, then it'll go to me. Is there some kind of versioning on the book? Not at the moment, but it's something we're planning to have pretty shortly. We're at least looking to have like a release date or a generated date, something on it to where you can tell the day it was mentioned. We don't have any kind of public access to a repository for the book to show what changed from draft to draft, but we're at least looking to get some sort of an output on there to let you know when it was made. And we might keep like a 2.1 version of the book around while we work on the 2.2 version, but these days it's seen as more of a living document, and so there's not really it may just slowly migrate over to 2.2 as we update it. Okay, what about running single IP CARP on southbound interfaces? Any impact on reachability, routing, etc., assuming northbound isn't a single IP? It's the same situation where if it's just pure client access, that would not really be a big deal. But if that interface had to reach the primary or secondary individually, then it could be a problem. If you're just talking about a client access where it's just purely like an internet access type situation or from interface to interface, and they don't need to hit the firewalls directly, that'd work fine. Whether or not you can actually do it that way with a 30 instead of a /29, it really depends on what you're running on that. If it's basically an interconnect for routing to something else, then that should be okay. But it's something you want to test with and experiment with. It probably will work. I suspect it will work as long as you don't actually have to talk directly to the nodes, just through. Okay. Anything else? Is there a list of things to look out for when upgrading anywhere? I can foresee many forum questions. Yes, there is, but I don't know if we've updated it for 2.2. There is always our upgrade guide on the doc wiki. There's always this guy here. I don't think we have anything specifically in there for 2.2 yet. We have some for like going from 1.2.3 to 2.0 and 2.0 to 2.1, and I imagine we will have a section there for 2.2, but at the moment, the only big thing I can think of that might impact people is the change in the behavior of the LANnet macro might mean that their rules are a little more permissive than they were otherwise. But we may have some notes in there about CARP and things like that. But that's something we'll fill in as we get some experience back from users and upgrading and things they've hit. And we've tested upgrading internally, and so far there haven't been really any real big showstoppers. But anytime we change things, we try to make it as easy as possible for those that are upgrading. And where possible, we've made it as simple as possible. But we can't always help everything, which is why that page exists. Anything else? And that upgrade guide in particular is one that is on my to-do list to revamp a bit. I might restructure it such that it's a little more oriented on version to version instead of a big long list like that. But it's something that a lot of people are going to refer to, I'm sure. Though, from what we've seen in our testing so far, anyway, things have been pretty smooth. Okay, well, unless we have any more questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. It's been great talking to you. 2.2 should be out, like I said, not too distant future. Things are getting more and more stable every day, and we should have an RC in a really, really near term. And I mean, not like this week, but very, very soon. And we'll have some exciting stuff to share with you when that hits. So we'll really looking forward to getting a lot of people using this in production once it's ready for that. A lot of people are excited about it. We're excited about it. Everybody's excited about it. It's a great leap forward for everybody. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you next month. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for the Hangout, post them as comments on our blog or on the forum, on Reddit, wherever you can reach us. Just say, hey, I'd like to see a Hangout about blah, and we'll put it on our list and try to accommodate it. And like I said, I know we are planning a couple post 2.2, especially one on IPsec and configuring that, and we're probably going to be doing one on that's oriented around the Amazon AWS version once we get 2.2 live and approved in there, and some other fun stuff. So that's all for now. We'll see you next month. Bye.